Hi there. Welcome again to the second video on the Enough is Enough YouTube channel. I had hoped by now to have a couple of videos up, but Dr. Chetty has made some comments over the last week or so that I've had to really kind of stop and have a think about before I proceed much further. I really want to understand where he was coming from, and he made those comments on the kind of bigger picture, like what he thinks might be happening out there, and began to tap into what I would think of as a conspiracy theory. So I was in a bit of a dilemma. I really value the treatment that he has pioneered, basically, and his understanding of COVID. I found it very helpful, and I still do. After 3 weeks or more now of avid reading and studying and doing what research I can, I found nothing to contradict what he has found, nothing to suggest that it's not effective as he says that it is, which is fantastic. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that what he's presenting, this kind of two different pathologies approach, and that the issue more is an allergic reaction, still makes incredible sense, and even makes more sense of other people's studies. I've read studies that basically are inconclusive. You know, that they sometimes things work, sometimes they don't. And Dr. Chetty's kind of grid makes more sense of what their studies are saying than what they do. So, which is a fascinating thing. So I'm still very passionate about that. I want as many people to explore that. And if there are issues with it, we want to find out what they are. But if it is true, then we need to really act on this, and we could benefit from this. So I want to continue the videos. However, I'm not a conspiracy theorist. I have heard many and have researched many, and there's some fundamental areas that they tend to break down. And while I think I understand where Dr. Chetty is coming from, it must be difficult to see so much success and feel that the world generally is ignoring that success and not listening to what you have to say. And I empathize with that. However, for me, it's a big jump then to see that there is a big collusion going on by the governments of the world and the larger health bodies to decimate the population. And that's essentially what he and others are saying. And I think that argument fails on many, many grounds. The most obvious of which is that our governments struggle to agree on anything, let alone somehow implement something that is a worldwide conspiracy to do something so horrific. Many of these elected officials, yes, they've got self-interest. Yes, there are problems and agendas and all that sort of stuff, which totally I get that. But to have a coordinated approach that is so kind of devastating in its effect, to imagine that people who are elected to public office, basically who want to just do the right thing and serve people for the most part, would buy into that without there being dissenters and whistleblowers, and that's just too difficult for me to accept. So I've been looking into it. I've been doing some more research. It's not enough to just say I don't agree with it and I see problems with it. I want to know the truth. I want to know what's really going on here. I see the same things that Dr. Chetty and others see. I see a reluctance by the medical community to embrace alternative treatments, and for me that's a problem. Anytime you just dismiss things out of hand is a problem. So why is it that our governments have been so heavy-handed and so strong? And what drives that narrative, if you will? And I use that word deliberately. We all operate out of a sense of story, a sense of narrative, a sense of how we think that the world works. And often when we have arguments and disagreements, it's precisely for that reason that there's a conflict of narrative. When you believe something strongly, when you see the world in a certain way, when someone comes to you and says, look, I have a different opinion, most of us don't respond saying, wow, tell me all about it. Most of us will be suspicious. Most of us will think, well, hang on, I already know what's going on here. Why should I listen to you? And so to get alternative points of view across, often we resort to speaking more loudly, try to find ways to compel others to accept our narrative. I don't think that's the best way. I think that's a very sad way to go about it. But that's the reality. We tend not to be open to alternative points of view. And that's not just a select few. That's the majority of us. And you might not like me saying that, but that's human nature. That we need our grid to work. And when it does, it's very hard for us to accept something else. So I've done some reading, and there's some things I want to share with you that I think explain more accurately why our governments are responding the way they are. And again, why they might be closed to other narratives. So I want to suggest to you that the whole concept of a pandemic is not new. This is something that we've experienced before. In fact, most of what I'm going to share with you is from history. Because when you look back over history, you see the same patterns again and again and again with monotonous regularity. And they give us real insight into what we are currently experiencing. So, like I said to you, we've been expecting a pandemic. Our governments, our medical authorities have been trying to prepare for that for decades, for over 150 years that I so far have found. One of the more telling examples of that, the most helpful for me recently, has been a 431-page CDC report from a workshop they conducted, trying to learn from the past and trying to prepare for the next pandemic. And one of the things they say is that they strongly felt that our governments are underprepared. And so the whole point of the workshop was to try to learn from the past and to try to find a better way forward. So the most obvious thing they did was look at past pandemics. Now this document is easy to find. You can download it. I downloaded the PDF and I've been going through it and highlighting bits that really stand out. And there's some amazing things in there that are parallels to what we see now. But there are other things that were actually the opposite, that actually didn't work, that speak into why our governments are, I think, reacting the way that they are. One of the major things they looked at was the Spanish flu, an incredible pandemic that just took so many lives and more lives, way more lives than what we've seen taken as a result of COVID. Mind you, I know that COVID is not over yet. And the response of the governments generally was really quite interesting and not a good response to follow. I hear sometimes people say, well, we've not done lockdowns before. We've not approached it this way before, so why should we do that this time? I would suggest to you one of the principal reasons that we do it is as a reaction to what they did in the Spanish flu. See, you've got to understand the context of the Spanish flu. This was at the time of World War I, and many of the nations impacted by the Spanish flu were fighting World War I, or were part of that. And there was a very strong sensitivity, or a great sensitivity, to any kind of negative that would impact on morale. In fact, so much so that they passed laws. Now, we're upset about laws about mandates. I am too. I'm not a fan of mandates at all. But they passed a different sort of law. They passed laws where in the US, you could be hit with 20 years jail if you spoke negatively against government policy. And it could be benign. It didn't have to be major. And so that was the culture. That was the mindset, is we've got to keep morale up. So we can't criticize the government. We can't criticize decisions that they make. So along comes the Spanish flu. And one of the only countries not involved in the war at that time was Spain. And why it's called the Spanish flu is because they didn't have the same negativity to public and government criticism. They called it for what it was. They said, we have the flu. This is serious. It's killing massive numbers of people. And so it became known as the Spanish flu. But the response in many other countries was not the same. As I said, in the US and in England and other places, we had a real sensitivity toward anything that would be seen as negative. And so the governments of the day chose to respond very differently. They downplayed it incredibly so. Initially, just saying it was a normal flu. Yes, maybe a little bit more severe, but nothing to worry about. Then when people started dying left, right and center, it was more a case of, well, we're on top of it. We've got it under control. It'll be okay. Still more people died. You imagine what that does to the mindset of people watching their friends and family die and their government saying, it's all okay. There was a major crisis of trust. Governments, interestingly enough, that did tell the truth, that were more upfront about it, they found that there was less of a loss of life. There were not widespread lockdowns like what we see today, but some governments did implement lockdowns. And where those happened, the death rates were lower. There was a positive impact as a result of that. So you imagine a modern day government. This report was written in 2005, well before the COVID-19 pandemic. And they're trying to strategize for whatever is to come. You know, it could be the avian flu, it could be the swine flu. They don't know what it's going to be, but they know that mistakes were made in the past and they want to minimize the loss of life. So what they begin to strategize are the very things that we're seeing. There was a heavy reliance and expectation on vaccines. They wanted to fast track, to get access to those things. Because when you think about it, vaccines are fairly straightforward. You know, it's something that is predictable, that is repeatable. You can just inject people and this thing goes away. That's very much in their thinking. But also, you know, they realize that you need to be honest. You need to tell people that this is serious. And so we've heard that in all the rhetoric. We've heard incredible things that instill fear and anxiety. I don't think that's a positive either. I think it's an overreaction possibly to what was done before, but I can understand it. I can understand why they have gone down this route. And then, of course, lockdowns and other stringent measures to try to cut the spread of the virus. And I think there's a very clear logic in that if in anything you do that you cut and diminish the ability for something to be passed on, then of course you're going to minimize the death, etc. However, how far do you go with all that? And I think we have some major issues to ask in terms of those measures. You know, unfortunately, why I feel that some of these conspiracy theories come up is because there's not a lot of critique that goes on of these government policies. We've given these people, I think they've got the best intentions. At least I see that in their public address. But they're operating out of a grid that may not actually be necessary. You know, we've just suddenly assumed that COVID is as serious as what we think it is. And then we've gone with that. We've run with that. We've run with that so hard for 18 months that when alternative therapies come up, we dismiss them. We're not that interested because our narrative tells us that we already know that this is serious. And then we find ways for these alternative therapies to be shot down and to be discredited. What I find very interesting about Dr. Chetty's approach to therapy, I'm yet to find anyone that meaningfully interacts with it in a negative way. Nobody. What I find is silence. Bear in mind, this man has been treating people for over 18 months throughout the pandemic. He has not had a single hospitalization, a single person need oxygen, and a single death. He has identified it very differently to what generally we're being told. He's identified a second element to it that is an allergic reaction that he's dealing with head on, and he's dealing with it as quickly as possible, and he's having amazing results. That narrative does not fit with our government narrative. And so what I'm saying here is that I don't buy into the conspiracy. I don't think there is a widespread attempt to depopulate or control our population using this. There may be a small group that is doing that, but that's the only way I could see that working. Now, I'm not saying I know that. I'm not saying that's a certainty at all. I'm saying, yes, it's a possibility. I'm not prepared to dismiss any possibilities. I want to know the truth, and I think we all need to know the truth. So I'm not prepared to just dismiss anything. However, if you are to bring, now bear with me, this is highly, it's a hypothetical, basically. If you were to have a conspiracy like that, and if you were to make it work, secrecy is your friend. You would tell as few people as possible. And again, history tells us this. If you look back throughout history and you see those that have gone big time on a big scale and involved many people in their theory, Hitler would be an example that I would use. There was a propaganda machine behind it. Communist China, I guess similar. There is an attempt to indoctrinate everybody that this is the best way. Hitler proposed a master race. He proposed policies that led to terrible atrocities. Inexcusable, unmentionable, really. I mean, heartbreaking stuff. But he brought a whole nation on board with him and other nations too. I don't see that anywhere in relation to COVID-19. I see a rhetoric and a narrative that does make sense. However, it's based on assumptions that may actually not be true. And so why I'm producing these videos and why I'm trying to get my voice and add that to other voices is not to add to the conspiracy theories, but is to try to cut through a lot of the emotion, and there's a lot of emotion out there, to try to cut through some of the more bizarre theories that are out there and try to ask very simple questions. Are there plausible reasons for why people are doing what they are doing? What are the assumptions that those narratives are based on, and are they valid? And so I'm asking those questions. And what I'm suggesting to you is that in Dr. Chetty's therapy, I see something that challenges the basic assumptions for the narratives that surround us. And I want to invite you and others, as many as possible, to examine what he has found. And if there is truth in it, we need to bring that to light. We need to help as many people to realize that and understand that as possible, in the hope that calmer heads would prevail, that we can have a narrative that is based on more accurate assumptions, and maybe dispel some of the myths that are out there. As far as I can tell so far, there's a very real possibility that COVID is not what we thought it was, that it is far more manageable than what we ever dreamed, and that with the right steps and the right medications, the right protocols in place, we can get back to basically a normal life. So again, I ask you to consider what I'm sharing. I know some of it might be hard to accept. Take your time with it. Do further research. Go online. Go wherever you need to go. But try to avoid the extremes. Extreme emotion, strong emotion, can make it very difficult for us to think clearly. And so what I'm really wanting to do is just dial down all that emotion and take a deep breath and look again at what's really going on around us. And I think you'll find that there are some real truths there that can help us to find a way forward. So thank you for listening, and I look forward to chatting to you again. Thank you. Farewell.